Across 4 states last night with President Trump sounding optimistic about the midterms. He's tweeted a lot on this. Here's one of them. Great Republican election results last night. So far, we have the team we want. 8 for 9 in special elections. Red wave. John McCormick, senior writer, Weekly Standard. John, how you doing? Good day to you. He's tweeted support for candidates in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Connecticut so far. How do you analyze last night, John? Let's start there.
Well, the races I was following most closely were in Wisconsin and Minnesota. In Wisconsin, it was really a contest of personalities or biographies in the Senate race. There were 2 impressive candidates, Kevin Nicholson, a former combat veteran, Leah Vukmir, who ended up winning. She was a former nurse and a state senator. And Vukmir, the so-called establishment candidate, won. She had the support of Paul Ryan, Reince Priebus, while Kevin Nicholson had the support of Steve Bannon, so he had more of the outsider image. He was also a former college Democrat, so he had a lot of sparring over past comments, but not really divide over the issues. It kind of shows you how the Republican Party on the issues, both candidates very supportive of Trump's policies, the general conservative GOP agenda. Even though most voters in Wisconsin opposed tariffs by a 2-to-1 margin, both candidates, Nicholson and Vukmir, support Trump's tariffs. So it just shows you how in a Republican primary, both candidates want to be on the right side of Trump.
Here's the Minnesota. Sorry, go ahead.
Minnesota, on the other side, big upset there. Former Governor Tim Pawlenty lost his primary for his chance to be governor again. So that was interesting in the fact that I guess voters there they backed the less-known candidate who they both fought over who had been more critical of Trump in 2016. The candidate who won, Johnson, had called him a donkey, a harsher term than that, and Pawlenty had said that Trump was unfit, but he was still going to vote for him anyway. So again, not a lot of policy, but a lot of fighting over who was more loyal to the president over substance style, and that was really what I saw in Minnesota and Wisconsin.
The outsider label really stuck in 2016, especially with President Trump's win. Here's the headline from the Wall Street Journal. Political outsiders progress in state races. They're reflecting on both parties right now, pulling in outsiders who would normally not win political elections before, are now doing that in both parties. Do you see that, John?
I would say it really depends on the state. So again, in Wisconsin, it was the the conservative GOP establishment. Paul Ryan, almost all the congressional candidates endorsed Leah Vukmir, who won. We just saw in West Virginia where Don Blankenship, he lost. It was the Attorney General Morrissey who won. So it really does depend on the state. But in terms of the issues, 10 years ago, or even 4 years ago, candidates were really divided on issues on things like Obamacare, spending, abortion. Right now, a lot of these primaries have much more to do with substance and style. It kind of shows you that the GOP agenda, there's not really much forward-looking agenda as to what they're going to do in the future. So I think that really kind of explains where the Republican Party is right now.
Let me play a clip from Stephen Colbert last night. He had Bernie Sanders on. I think the question is telling, the answer is telling. I'll ask you about this in a moment. Watch.
Only half the people you campaigned for won their primaries so far, so maybe there's a little taint to socialism that turns people off.
I don't really think so. I think the real issue is that the ideas that we have been talking about, almost without exception, Stephen, are now ideas that are mainstream ideas that are supported by the vast majority of the American people.
I think there are a lot of ways to examine this. I think Bernie Sanders would probably support the fact that his ideas are mainstream. He's going to make that argument repeatedly. And you can take the other side of that. Colbert's question seems to be rooted in more of a democratic angst about the progressive left finding success. But it doesn't seem as if that far left wave is really catching on in a lot of these races. Do you see it the same way, John?
Well, yeah, I think a lot of these avowedly, socialist candidates are losing because the Democratic mainstream is moving to the left to fend off these challenges. So you said a lot of candidates embracing single-payer health care. But to Bernie Sanders' point, within the Democratic Party at least, not writ large in the American electorate, socialism is now viewed more popularly than capitalism is within the Democratic Party. You've seen a lot of Democratic candidates embrace single-payer Medicare for all. The real problem with making this popular nationwide is how are you going to pay for that in the first place? And also, of course, questions about rationing. When California looked into establishing single-payer health care, they found out that it would cost $400 billion annually. That is double the entire California state budget of $200 billion. Just another study recently showed that if we were to do Medicare for all, single-payer health care nationwide, that would cost about over $3 trillion a year. Right now we're spending $4 trillion nationwide. Our total federal budget, military, Social Security, Medicare, you name it. So that's the real problem. I think the real problem facing Democratic socialists like Bernie Sanders is, they might be able to sell this in the Democratic Party. They might be able to win some elections. They might be able to make the Democratic establishment move toward their side. But when it comes time to govern and to actually implement a Democratic socialist agenda, they're going to be running up against some very difficult numbers.
It is a campaign of ideas, as we all well know, right and left. Thank you, John McCormick. Nice to talk to you in Washington today. Thanks.
Meanwhile, the president also tweeting his support for Chris Kobach for governor in Kansas. Kobach eking out the win, defeating current governor Jeff Colyer by just over 300 votes, a close one. That primary was last week. Colyer conceded the race last night. Chris Kobach will join us later in the show.
Looking forward to hearing his
Some close races, but this one was an interesting one.
Very much so.
300 votes, that's nothing.
It looked like during the recount that he may have lost.